Ever heard the saying, the truth hurts?
Well, for one king, it was a truth he literally tried to dodge, and the story is just wild.
Let's talk about King Ahab from the Old Testament. This guy had a serious problem. He preferred a good, comforting lie over a hard, inconvenient truth any day of the week.
So, Ahab wants to go to war to reclaim a city called Ramoth-Gilead. Like any good king, he gathers his advisors.
In this case, about 400 prophets. He asks them, should I go to war, or should I stay home? And what a surprise, all 400 of them say, go for it, king. You're gonna win. God is with you. It's a massive pep rally.
Everyone's hipped. But there's another king there, Jehoshaphat, who's a bit more discerning.
He looks around at all these cheering prophets and thinks, this feels a little too good to be true. He asked Ahab, isn't there anyone else we can ask? You know, a prophet of the Lord. Ahab sighs.
He's like, oh, fine. There's this one guy, Micaiah, but I can't stand him.
He never says anything good about me. It's always doom and gloom, right there. That tells you everything you need to know about Ahab.
He wasn't looking for God's will.
He was looking for God's approval of his own will. He hated the messenger because he hated the message.
So they bring in Micaiah. At first, Micaiah is sarcastic.
When Ahab asks him the same question, he just parrots back what the other prophets said. Oh yeah, go for it.
You'll have a glorious victory. But his tone is so dripping with sarcasm that even Ahab knows he's not being serious.
Ahab insists, tell me the truth in the name of the Lord.
And that's when Micaiah drops the bombshell.
He says, I saw all Israel scattered on the hills, like sheep without a shepherd. In other words, if you go, you're not coming back.
The army will be leaderless.
Well, you can imagine how that went over.
Ahab turns to Jehoshaphat and says, see,
what did I tell you? Nothing but bad news from this guy.
But Micaiah isn't finished. He then shares this incredible vision he had. He saw God sitting on his throne, with the entire host of heaven around him.
God asks, who will entice Ahab to go to war so he can be killed at Ramoth-Gilead? Different spirits suggest different things. But then one steps forward and says, I'll do it.
I will be a lying spirit in the mouths of all his prophets. And God basically says, okay, go. You will succeed.
This part is fascinating. God isn't the author of the lie, but in his sovereignty, he permits this evil spirit to go and deceive Ahab's prophets.
Why? Because judgment had already been passed.
Ahab had a long history of wickedness and ignoring God's warnings.
He had rejected the truth so many times that God, in a sense, gave him over to the deception he so clearly wanted. It was a divine setup to ensure his judgment was carried out.
One of the false prophets gets so angry, he walks up and slaps Micaiah across the face, mocking him. And what does Ahab do? Does he pause and consider the gravity of this warning? Nope.
He orders his guards to throw Micaiah in prison. Give him nothing but bread and water until I get back safely from the war, he commands. Micaiah's last words to him are chilling. If you ever return safely, then the Lord has not spoken through me.
Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Ahab heard the prophecy.
A part of him must have believed it, or at least been worried by it, because he comes up with a clever plan.
He thinks he can outsmart God.
He tells King Jehoshaphat, hey, you go into battle wearing your royal robes.
You be the obvious king. Me?
I'm going to disguise myself as a regular soldier.
I'll just blend in with the troops. His logic was simple. The enemy army would be looking for the king of Israel to kill.
If they saw Jehoshaphat in all his royal splendor, they'd go after him, leaving the real target.
Ahab, safe and sound in his commonest disguise. It's a cunning, manipulative plan that puts his ally's life directly in harm's way.
He's using Jehoshaphat as a decoy.
So the battle begins, and just as Ahab predicted, the Syrian army commanders have one order. Don't fight with anyone, small or great, except the king of Israel. They see Jehoshaphat in his royal robes and immediately surround him.
It looks like the plan is working perfectly for Ahab, but Jehoshaphat, in his moment of terror, cries out to God.
And the Syrian commanders, realizing he's not Ahab, pull back. They leave him alone.
Meanwhile, Ahab is somewhere else on the battlefield, feeling pretty smug in his disguise.
He thinks he's dodged the bullet. He thinks his human cleverness has outwitted a divine prophecy.
But you can't outsmart God. The Bible then says something incredible. But a certain man drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the scale armor and the breastplate.
Let that sink in. At random, an unnamed soldier, not even aiming at anyone in particular, just lets an arrow fly. And that arrow, guided by the sovereign hand of God, finds the one tiny, vulnerable gap in Ahab's armor and hits him. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a coincidence.
It was a divine appointment. Despite his fatal wound, Ahab stays propped up in his chariot, facing the enemy, bleeding out all day. By evening, he's dead.
The prophecy came true, down to the last detail.
His clever disguise, his strategic use of a decoy, all his human cunning.
It was completely useless against the will of God.
The random arrow wasn't random at all.
It was the instrument of God's perfect and inescapable judgment. So what can we take away from this epic story? First, there's a huge lesson about truth and discernment. Ahab surrounded himself with people who told him what he wanted to hear.
He actively rejected the one voice of truth because it was uncomfortable.
It's a reminder for us to be careful about only listening to voices that affirm our own desires. We need to be people who genuinely seek truth, even when it's hard to swallow.
Second, it shows the consequences of a hard heart.
Ahab wasn't just a guy who made one bad decision.
He had a long pattern of disobedience, idolatry, and rejecting God. His end wasn't a surprise.
It was the culmination of a life lived in rebellion.
Micaiah's prophecy was the final warning, the last chance to turn back, and he refused. And finally, this story is a powerful illustration of God's sovereignty.
God is in control, not in a robotic, puppet master way, but his ultimate purposes will always be accomplished. Ahab thought he could manipulate the situation, control the outcome, and cheat fate.
But his scheme was no match for God's plan.
That random arrow shows that even the seemingly smallest, most chance events are woven into God's sovereign design to bring about his will and his justice. Ahab's story is a sobering warning.
You can't run from God. You can't hide from his truth. And you certainly can't outsmart his plans. It challenges us to ask ourselves, are we seeking comforting lies, or are we brave enough to live by God's truth, no matter the cost?
Thanks so much for watching.
If this story made you think, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into these incredible biblical narratives.
See you in the next one, and God bless you.